So glad you could join me today for PJ's Storytime. I have another great tale I'd like to share with you. Long ago, there lived in Italy a little girl named Piccola. Her father had died, and she and her mother lived in an old stone house. She had no brothers and sisters with whom she could play. They were very poor, and her mother went away from home nearly every day to scrub and clean to earn money to buy food and clothing for herself and her little girl. And so Piccola was left alone much of the time. She had almost no toys. She had an old rag doll which had belonged to her mother when she was a little girl, which she carried about with her everywhere that she went. Sometimes she picked up stones in the backyard and built little walls and houses. There were no trees or flowers in Piccola's yard. If she had not been such a happy, contented little girl, she would have often been very lonely. At the back of Piccola's yard, there was a stone wall, and one day she discovered in this wall a small hole. She stood on tiptoe and peeped through. She expected to see another yard like her own, but to her surprise, she saw what to her looked like a fairyland. There were flowers and green grass and a fountain with water, and flying about among the trees were birds. She was filled with joy. Every day after that, Piccola looked through the hole in the wonderful garden. She imagined that there were fairies living there, and she told her doll stories of how the fairies came out at night and danced among the flowers. One day, she heard the sound of soft laughter, which seemed to come from the garden. She ran to the wall and peeped through the hole. Playing in the garden, she saw a number of children. They were little American children who, with their mother, who was ill, had come to Italy to spend the winter. Day after day, Piccola watched the children playing in the garden. After that, she was never lonely, for all day long the children ran and played games in the garden. For more than a week, the children did not see Piccola, and then, one day, the little boy ran along close beside the wall, and suddenly he saw bright black eyes looking back at him. At first he was frightened and ran away. But soon he came back with his older sister, who spoke to Piccola. When they learned that it was only a lonely little girl who was watching them at play, and they were not in the least frightened. Every day they talked to her through the hole, and they thought of fun games which they could play together. And sometimes they brought her fruit and nuts and passed them through the hole. One day, they tried to push their kitten through the hole to Piccola, but the kitten was frightened and meowed and scratched. And then it was that the little boy thought of making the hole in the wall larger, so that Piccola herself could crawl through and play with them. His father was willing, and soon the stones were broken away and the opening made. And then, one day, Piccola stepped into the garden. She was so excited and happy. She was all dressed in her very best, a white waist and a bright-colored woolen skirt. Round her neck was a string of beads, and on her feet were little wooden shoes. Piccola did not wear stockings. She and her mother were too poor for that. Most of the time, she played about barefoot. But today was a wonderful day, and she wore her wooden shoes. Every day after breakfast, Piccola crept through the hole. Sometimes the children were not yet in the garden, and then she walked about by herself and looked at the flowers and listened to the splashing of the water in the fountain. And when the children came, they ran and danced and played all together through the long, happy day. And so the days passed, and December came, and the American children began to talk about Christmas. One day, as she stepped into the garden, the little boy said, "Oh, Piccola, what do you want for a Christmas present?" "A Christmas present?" said Piccola. "Why, what is that?" "Didn't you ever have a Christmas present, Piccola?" cried the children. Of course, Piccola knew that Christmas was the day on which Christ had been born so many long years ago. She had been to the church and seen there a picture of the baby Christ, lying in the manger in Bethlehem, with his mother bending over him, and all around him were sheep and cattle. Her little heart was filled with love as she thought of him, but she did not know what a Christmas present was. And then the children told Piccola that because the loving Father in heaven had given to the children of earth the gift of his Son, the Christ child, who came to earth to be the children's friend, that on the day of his birth, people gave to each other gifts in remembrance of him. And then they told her of Santa Claus, who was the bearer of gifts. Oh, dear old Santa Claus, who came on Christmas Eve to the children of every country, bringing presents to them. They told of his twinkling eyes and his long white beard, and of his fur coat, of how he lived away up north, and how he came in his sleigh drawn by reindeer, of how he stopped on the roofs of houses wherever children lived, and taking gifts from his loaded sleigh, he tiptoed to the chimney, and down he came and left presents for good children, and that for bad children he sometimes left nothing at all. And the children talked of what they wanted for Christmas, and by the time it was noon and time for dinner and for Piccola to go home, as she was leaving, the children cried, "And now, Piccola, you must be very good, and be sure to hang your stocking Christmas Eve." "Hang up my stocking?" said Piccola. "Why must I do that?" "Why, so that Santa Claus can put your presents in it," said the children. "That is where he always puts them." Piccola was delighted at this and went home, with her mind filled with the picture of the stockings filled with Christmas presents, which she was to find hanging beside the chimney Christmas morning. She told her mother about Santa Claus, but her mother said that she was afraid Santa Claus did not know that a little girl lived in the old stone house and that he might not come. But Piccola wrote a note to Santa Claus and sent it up the chimney, and she was sure that he would come. And every day in the garden, the children talked of Christmas and Santa Claus and toys and dolls and balls and hoops and ribbons and tops and marbles and other things. At last, Christmas Eve came. Piccola and her mother had their supper early, and Piccola began to think of getting ready for Santa Claus. First, she swept the hearth quite clean and put her little chair in its place, and then she stood by the chimney thinking how Santa Claus would come down the chimney. He will come so quietly, she thought, and just for a minute he will stand on the hearth, looking to see that no one is about, and then he will reach for my stocking. And suddenly the smile faded from her face, and the tears came into her eyes. Why, she had no stocking. Neither had her mother. Santa Claus would think that she had forgotten, and he would be angry. The tears ran down her face. Just then her mother called to her that it was time for bed. She stopped crying. She must do something. She looked down at her feet and she saw her wooden shoes, and she said to herself, "The very thing. I will set one of them by the chimney. Santa Claus will understand. He will know that I have no stockings and that I have set my shoe here so that he may have a place to put my present." She took off one of her little wooden shoes and set it close beside the chimney and went happily to bed and to sleep. Early the next morning, she awakened and she crept softly out of bed, not to waken her mother. She ran over to the hearth. There was her shoe just as she had left it the night before. She took it carefully into her hands and looked into it, and away down in a toe, oh, you never could guess what was there. And so I'll have to whisper it to you. A tiny bird, asleep in her wooden shoe. Piccola was so happy that for a minute she just stood still and looked at the bird. And then she danced over to the bed, crying, "Mother, Mother, look, look! See the gift which Santa Claus has brought to me." Her mother raised her head from the pillow and looked into the shoe. "Why, Piccola," she said, "a little bird, a little chimney swallow, nesting in your shoe. How kind of Santa Claus to bring you a bird." And Piccola was so delighted that she kissed her mother, and she kissed the bird, and she even threw kisses up the chimney, hoping that one might reach Santa Claus. They took the bird out of the shoe. He did not seem frightened. He hopped about the room, and he took a drink of water from a cup, and even ate crumbs and seeds from Piccola's hand. Piccola's mother found a wicker cage, which she had had for a long time, and they put the bird into it. Piccola was so happy and so proud of her present that she could scarcely wait to show it to the children in the garden. After breakfast, she hurried to the garden, carrying the precious cage. And I wish that you could have been there to see how delighted the children were with Piccola's present. They had many beautiful gifts, but not one of them was alive like Piccola's bird. They hung the cage on a branch of a tree, and the little bird sat on his perch, watching with his bright eyes the children as they played about. And there was no happier little girl in all of Italy than Piccola. The end.